E. It's a feeling I never thought would grip me. A strange pull, like a force outside my control. You know that feeling when something feels completely wrong but somehow so undeniably right? That was him. My neighbor, 72 years old. And yet there I was, unable to stop myself from crossing a line I knew better than to even think about. I had always thought I had my life together. A loving husband, a steady job. Everything seemed perfect. I was the model of stability, the perfect housewife. But then I met him. I remember the first time I saw him. He had just moved in next door and he was different. Not your typical man. He wasn't like the others I knew. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, with those eyes so full of life. So full of stories, so full of desire. He was older, yes, much older, but there was something magnetic about him, something about his presence that made me feel alive. I had no reason to feel the way I did, but I couldn't help it. The attraction was there, smoldering beneath the surface. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was about to change. It started with small things, casual conversations over the fence, neighbors talking. At first it was innocent. But there was always a lingering tension between us. I couldn't put my finger on it. He would look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. His glances would linger just a bit too long, a bit too intensely, and every time I caught his gaze, my heart would race. I hated it. I hated that I was reacting this way. I hated that he had this power over me. But the more I tried to distance myself, the closer he seemed to get. He was relentless in his pursuit of me. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He made me feel seen, in a way that my husband never did, in a way that no one ever had. One evening we ran into each other at the mailbox. The way he smiled at me, a grin that was somehow both mischievous and reassuring, made my knees weak. He had this energy. And before I knew it, we were talking, really talking, in a way I hadn't talked to anyone in years. And when our hands brushed against each other, I felt a spark, a real spark. It was electric. And then in that moment I realized I was in trouble. I should have walked away. I should have pulled my hand back and gone inside. But I didn't. I stayed there, talking, flirting, letting the tension build. And the more it built, the harder it became to ignore the heat between us. Then came the night I will never forget. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, and my husband was away on business. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there he was, my 72-year-old neighbor, standing on my doorstep. His presence so commanding, so overwhelming. He told me he needed to talk. Something about the way he said it sent chills down my spine. "Can I come in?" he asked. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was anything but. My heart started pounding. I didn't want to invite him in, but something inside me urged me to say yes. I couldn't resist, and once I opened the door, there was no going back. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The atmosphere became thick, heavy with anticipation. He didn't even have to say anything. His presence was enough. He moved closer to me, slowly, deliberately, and before I knew it, his hand was on my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin. I could feel the heat radiating from him, from the way his body hovered just inches away from mine. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. His lips crushed against mine with a hunger I had never known. It wasn't gentle or soft, it was fierce, desperate, like he had been waiting for this moment for far too long. And before I could even think, I found myself kissing him back. The kiss was electric, magnetic, undeniable. I could feel the weight of his age, but it didn't matter. The man in front of me wasn't 72 years old anymore. He was powerful. He was strong. He was everything I had been craving but couldn't admit. And as his hands began to explore my body, I lost all sense of control. What we did that night, I can't even put into words. The passion was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was raw. It was primal. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years. With every touch, every kiss, I felt myself slipping further away from everything I knew. But I didn't care. I didn't want to care. The next morning, I woke up in a haze. I couldn't believe what had happened. Was it real? Was it a mistake? But even as I questioned everything, I knew one thing for certain. I wanted more. I tried to distance myself. I tried to act normal, to pretend like nothing had happened. But the pull was too strong. Every time I saw him, every time I caught a glimpse of him, I felt that same burning desire. That same need to cross the line again. And so we did. Over and over again, I knew it was wrong. I knew I was risking everything, my marriage, my reputation, my whole life. But every time I was with him, I felt like I was someone else, someone free, someone powerful. It wasn't just about the sex, though. It was about the feeling of being wanted, truly wanted. Then, one day I walked in on something that made my heart stop. I had just gotten home early from work, and when I opened the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There he was, standing in the living room with my husband. And for the first time I saw him through a different lens. Not the powerful, magnetic neighbor, but someone who had crossed a line too. Someone who had betrayed a trust. My trust. But what did it all mean? Was this the end or just the beginning?